Plenty of new Thousand Sons rules changes today. Let's take a look through 5 new rules from the upcoming Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking a look at Warhammer Community's latest preview for the Thousand Sons, where they've basically showed off 5 new rules for the army. The Codex is due for pre-order tomorrow, alongside that new Hex Firebox and the Infernal Master, and it's going to be interesting to see how the army has changed, particularly as they're not the strongest right now in current 40k. I'll most certainly be reviewing the Codex in full just as soon as I can. That will likely drop on Tuesday or Wednesday next week, so if you want to see that review, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. In any case, let's see what we have so far, and talk about these new and upgraded rules. So first up, and perhaps the most major thing, is the major buff to the Scarab Occult Terminators. I think out of all the Thousand Sons units, these were the ones that I was most expecting to see improved. The Death Guard Terminators went to a whole nother level in their decks, and it seems that the same is going to be true of these guys. You'll be able to get your hands on them for 40 points per model, up a couple from 38, but the buffs they get just on the raw stats are spectacular. Previously, their close combat attacks were very weedy indeed, they just had damage 1 power swords, but Games Workshop have improved them to be carrying Prosperan Kopeshes, essentially power swords with a damage of 2. That means they're going to be strength 5, AP-3, damage 2 attacks, or a nice durable Terminator profile, so they really will be putting in good work at anything they catch in their grasp, and they have some pretty vicious shooting with their Inferno combi bolters as well. Never mind the fact that they can also cast a psychic power too, and also easy access to +1 to wound and an improved Soulreaper cannon, which we'll come on to in a second. We knew that they're going to be getting the extra wound, so they're going to be both improved offensively and defensively, and their base stat line is picking up an extra attack as well, going to 3, though I'm pretty certain that this will be at the expense of Hateful Assault, so most of the time it isn't going to come into effect all that much differently. It will just be a buff to ongoing combats where you're slogging it out for a few turns and you no longer receive Hateful Assault. I'd be surprised if these guys aren't one of the most competitive options in the new Codex. Their base stat line and damage output seems absolutely great now, and of course they're going to be a core Thousand Sons unit, which will mean that you can layer all your psychic buffs, stratagems and character support on them, including that new Infernal Master. I think that these guys are going to be ones to watch. Next up, we've got an army-wide Fearless special rule for their Automata units. Arcane Automata basically means that every time a morale test is taken for the Thousand Sons Automata unit, then it is automatically passed. I guess nice to know that your Automata won't just be heading for the hills when they take a casualty or two, and I guess it does kind of make sense for the lore. Still though, I find it a bit of a strange move. It does go against the trend of almost every army in 9th edition. Almost everyone is at least some way susceptible to morale now. Orcs are kind of famed for really not caring about death whenever they're in really big numbers surging forward, but they're susceptible. And even Necrons, who to me seem like they very much have the Automata thing going on as well. They still have leadership, they're just very high leadership at 10. I sort of wonder if that might have been a bit of a better move, just with morale not necessarily just representing models fleeing off the battlefield, but also maybe being surrounded, confused, or neutralised in other ways. Still, certainly a buff, and the Scarabs and the rubrics will just be that little bit more reliable now. Next up, we have a nice improvement to the Soulreaper cannon. The gun upgrade that cost 10 points on rubric marines will now 5 points on Scarab Occult Terminators. Previously, it was plus 10 points on both of the units, and I think that the change is quite good to be honest, as you're trading out a much better gun on the Scarabs because they have an Inferno combi bolter, not just a regular Inferno bolter. In any case, the Soulreaper cannon's just been buffed in a couple of ways. It's still a heavy weapon, though it now gets 5 shots rather than 4, and it now gets strength 6 rather than 5. I think it's looking like really quite an efficient choice in comparison with those combi bolters, and I think that the damage profile is actually quite good for the current Warhammer 40k meta. High AP certainly gets around a bunch of these stacking save barriers, and damage 1 means that it's not negated by things like Death Guard's Disgustingly Resilient, or any of the other many and varied -1 damage mechanics we have going now. I certainly see this as being a very good include on a Scarab Occult Terminator squad. I guess it's a bit more pricey on the rubric marines, but if you're building around a shooting unit, I don't see any real reason why you'd not take one. Just to make them extra tempting as well, they've also confirmed that Aula's Dust has indeed not changed at all. It's still +1 save against damage 1 weapons, and you also don't suffer the hit penalty when you move and shoot with heavy weapons. Pretty good on any of them just slogging up the board with this thing, or Scarab Occult Terminators jumping out of Deep Strike. The +1 save is going to go very nicely with the 2 wounds as well. It'll mean that Thousand Sons in particular are particularly resistant to damage 1 weapons. Maybe Games Workshop are going for them being a bit trickier to kill with damage 1 things, in the same way that Death Guard are really quite tricky to kill with damage 2 things. I guess Soulreaper cannons are going to be good at killing virtually anything else, but maybe not other Thousand Suns that much. Next up, we have a kind of expected change to Tzaangors and Cultists, and this one basically mirrors the changes to Poxwalkers and Cultists in the Death Guard Codex. I think it's quite a good fluffy change, to be honest. It means that a Thousand Suns list will have a hefty focus on rubric marines and Scarab terminators, as opposed to just being tempted to mass hordes of Tzaangors and things and just throw them into battle supported by a few sorcerers. Basically, in each Thousand Suns detachment, you can't take any more Bray units than you can of rubric marines and Scarab terminators, and the same goes for Cultists as well. I believe that means that if you say included 1 unit of rubric marines, you could take up to 1 unit of Cultists and up to 1 unit of Tzaangors if you chose. To be honest, I think that the change was actually quite well implemented in Codex Death Guard. Because Poxwalkers were just really quite efficient in their stat line, you still get people using absolutely loads of them, but there is a balance between them and the Terminators and the Plague Marines, rather than just literally fielding an endless tide of zombies, which, while being quite a cool idea, will probably be a bit of a grind to play against, and it doesn't really feel like how Death Guard operate most of the time in the lore. We know that Tzaangors are going to be decreased to 7 points from 9, which is going to make them a lot more efficient as a troops choice, and it's going to be interesting to see how much their profile changes going into the new book. I'm absolutely certain that they'll be a far more competitive pick, but obviously we're going to have to wait for the full details. I would also say that Cultists are likely to lose OBSEC in the same way as the Death Guard ones did, and might well be relegated to a bit more of a cheap fodder and action performing role, as opposed to being any sort of unit to build around. Compared with Death Guard though, I could still see Cultists being run. If a base Tzaangor squad is 70 points and a base Cultist squad is 50, then sometimes you just want to have the cheapest option possible to do some grunt work. Finally, we have a couple of stratagems shown off. For 1 or 3 command points there's Unwavering Phalanx, and this one all on its own just seems like a major power boost. You use it in the shooting phase when your Thousand Sun Rubric Marines or Scarabs are targeted as the target of an attack, and then you get -1 damage against that attack. It costs 1 command point on 5 model units or less, or 3 command points otherwise. This is just such a powerful rule to be able to turn on at the drop of a hat. They're already really resistant to 1 damage things, and if you have -1 damage as a reactive option on a unit, they're going to be horrifically resistant to 2 damage things too, and they can turn that on when they need it. I think that we're going to see a lot of 5-man Scarab Occult Terminator squads see play, as just 1 command point for -1 damage on them seems absolutely mental in addition to their other advantages. It's before we even get into any other psychic benefits they get from powers or the other character buffs they might receive. I'd most definitely expect this one to see play a lot, probably most efficient when you're using it for 1 CP, but maybe on an absolutely huge unit you could justify the 3 CP spend to make a unit really hard to kill for a turn. Finally, we have the new version of Veterans of the Long War, which is Wrath of the Wronged. Again, it's kind of similar to the Death Guard one, 2 command points for a +1 to wound, either in the shooting or the fight phase. It has to be Arcana Astartes infantry, so I suspect that will be the rubrics, the Scarabs, and some of the characters. It is obviously a bit toned down from the previous incarnation, but still +1 to wound is a really major damage boost, and I could still see this seeing a lot of use. They called out in the article how that Infernal Master can make one of your units strength 5 for their shooting, so imagine this combined with a whole ton of Inferno Combi Bolters or Warp Flamers. You get to wound Space Marines on 2s, or even things like Toughness 8 vehicles on 4s. Of course, it'll be interesting to see if there's any other shooting buffs. So there we have 5 new rules from the new Codex. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and of course feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see the full Codex review when I make it. Hopefully should be around Tuesday or Wednesday next week. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos, I would just like to mention one way that you can help support the channel, which is the Patreon page that you can find down in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.